we're delighted that this is, of course, part of the Edinburgh World Writers' Conference, and Berlin is the first of various venues as part of the ELB here event in Berlin to be part of that. So this is the first international outreach of the Edinburgh event this year. So welcome, have a great morning and a great debate, and I look forward very much to being part of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. When we were thinking about where to host this event, we said this is the most proper place. We're looking down on Alexanderplatz, one of the most important places in literature history in Germany. And we said, okay, let's collect a group of writers together here on a Sunday morning, give them a cup of coffee, and then speak about the future of the novel as well as maybe the other subject of the Edinburgh conference, and do it in an informal way, have a really exchange of minds. And as all of us are writers and all of us are in the literature business, I would suggest we do it in high speed, which is to say, no one needs to explain the Western canon, just drop the keyword canon, and so we go to make it interesting. I'm delighted to see that amongst us are two Icelandic writers, so one of the smaller nations of Europe, but I think the one with the longest and lasting tradition of narration are amongst us. But first of all, I would like to introduce last night's keynote speaker, Georg KLEIN and Sophie Cook. They were in the discussion yesterday. And but most of all, I would like to introduce Janne Teller. She was in the Edinburgh event, so to say the mothership of this discussion. And I think I would like to start with you, Janne, explaining a little bit what the discussion was like in Edinburgh. Just give us some keywords so we immediately broaden the scale of what we could talk about, taking in yesterday's discussion and maybe put it on a brighter scale.
I just have to be sure, we are just focusing on the future of the novel here because we did all the five different things. Yeah. Anyway, I have to say also Sophie was also there, but yeah, I was chairing the future of the novel session, and there China Miéville gave, I think, a very interesting statement. Even if personally I didn't agree with all what he said, but he was very visionary, and talking about how the internet opens up a lot of possibilities for novels to become interactive, and he spoke about, you know, the potential for novels to come in a number of different versions. The writer does his own first, and then readers become active and write like their versions of it, and how, you know, they could grab certain parts of a novel and continue working it in with other parts of other people's work. I find it pretty terrifying, but it's a reality, and I think it could be very interesting what we talk about. If others see it, you know, like I did, and I think most of the other writers in Edinburgh saw it like I, that's something we are not keen on, but it's true. The technical opportunities for that are basically there already. And China also spoke about, like, therefore, you know, the narrator becoming more of a cooperation. And again, a lot of people did not buy into that concept. Ben Okri talked a lot about, you know, the novel coming from the soul. I myself also feel it's a communication between something deeper in people. Johan talked about last night this big time, and I think again, when we really listen and write a novel from a deep part of ourselves, the reader, you know, communicates with that with us. So it's an intimate communication between the writer and the reader taking place with the novel as the bridge. And that I don't see can happen working as a cooperative, but maybe it's another form developing. But I believe it was a very interesting discussion we had there, opening up to some of what actually we're dealing with in the present world of challenges for the novel. So I don't know if have I overlooked something, Sophie. I feel that was the most important thing. And I'll just say also, at the very end of this, I would like, we met in a closed session on the initiative of a Scottish writer, Denise Minner, to discuss what is happening with the market. I think squeezing particularly serious literature for the moment a lot. And following this discussion we had in a closed session, we developed a statement. And at the end of this, I would like to just present the statement, because I hope you will all join us to try and work out. I mean, there maybe are no ideal ways, but at least we should make a counter wave to the present infringement on our copyrights, to this whole... I mean, since there is that Amazon, Google, and whatever have a right to give access to our works to all young people who, of course, like to get things for free because they don't realize the redistribution taking place goes from the little one, which is the artist, to the big ones, which are these IT conglomerates, that they are participating in that redistribution. But anyway, I think we take that at the end because it's very specific. It's also very boring in a sense to deal with the economics, but it's also part of this whole thing of threatening the artistic integrity of the work. So I think it's relevant.
I don't think it may contradict in one thing. I don't think it's boring, especially the way you address it, but we come back to it later. Cooperation. In your keynote yesterday, you kind of developed an idea of cooperation, which is not amongst the authors, but a cooperation between the author and the reader. This is the everlasting cooperation of literature, isn't it?
I think the reader loves the idea of a constant author. He loves to have the figure of an author. This must not be the real author. It can be almost 90% imagination. But the reader loves the idea that there is someone who did this, and he loves to identify with it. He loves to identify with the imagined person, and he loves to identify with the figure of creativity, which is in the author. So I'm not so sure if models which dissolve the author into a more or less organic system or like that will be very successful. And there's about the same idea or the same thing about the constancy of the body of a literal work. The reader likes the perception that the literary work is the same today, tomorrow, in 3, 4 weeks, in 5 or 6 years. This must not be true. For example, the translation of an important English novel will change through the decades. After 3 decades, a new translation will appear. So for the German reader, it isn't the same novel anymore. But the idea of constancy is important between reader and writer. On the other side, the writer loves the vision of the constant reader, the true reader, the loyal reader, which that's just a kind of marriage. Yeah? The reader marries this author and stays true over years and over decades.
But isn't that a very bourgeois understanding? You know, this 19th century understanding. You yesterday. You developed yesterday.
I'm thinking of the fairy tale, which has no single author and lasts forever. We still read them now, and we don't quite know who wrote them. And there are so many different versions. They're multi-authored tales, and it's like as long as the story itself stays constant, the mythical center, it's like the details can change. But you have this central truth that remains.
At least in Germany, the success of the fairy tale starts in the moment where a virtual author comes to the fairy tale, the Brothers Grimm. And from that point...
But they weren't the authors, they were the collectors.
Yeah, let's put it
the collectors.
But let's put it like this. Absolutely, it's a very good point of yours, but I think that nevertheless, the fairy tales in Germany are called the Grimm's Tales, which adds absolutely to what Georg is saying, and they introduced themselves. In the first edition of the Grimm's Tale, there is a depiction of a woman who told them to to the Grimms. So they were playing, and they wanted to have this continuity as well. But still, you yesterday in the discussion, you developed this idea of collective authors. It was your point in the discussion. So what could be the kind of different model?
I was more talking about a collective of heroes within a story, and I do think that that's a viable proposition. Just because now the challenges that people face are so huge because public life is so corporatized. If you're facing this headless, massive opposition there's no clear antagonist anymore in the way that there is in a traditional romance story. So I think for that, you need something different from the traditional romantic protagonist, the single hero who has a helpful mentor and lots of sidekicks. Because what we're facing is so much bigger and so much more amorphous, I think we need a slightly larger, more amorphous body of heroes within our novels. That's what I was...
But is this something new?
Yes.
Hasn't this been done before?
I don't think so, because I think there normally is, as well, perhaps in Greek mythology, yes, if the Iliad or something. But I don't think in contemporary literature it's happening. I think we're still writing these more bourgeois novels where you have the traditional capitalist culture hero who's an individual seeking personal happiness by achieving a goal. I think that's what most of our novels just now are about. But please disagree.
Well, whoever wants, and we want to be a collective as well, a collective of heroes. Whoever wants to say something, don't forget to grab the microphone.
There's one more.
Yes, here we go.
I'm Charlotte Gore, a writer living in London, currently in Berlin. But just a continuation of our last discussion in Edinburgh, because it was quite controversy, I guess, from that discussion. I didn't agree the last discussion in Edinburgh about future of the novel, which remained mainly discussion about marketing. And author no longer exists because every reader writes. There's no one has time to read, present the author anymore. Yeah. So I was thinking that's quite interesting because no longer the discussion about literature. It's about the change of readership, the form of reading, and the future of reading. And also I was thinking, last night discussion from GEORG KLEIN, I was thinking about future of the novel also, very, very important, also equally important, the future of readership. And I doubt reader is a static concept. Because really, like my generation, or I'm nearly 40, but the younger generation, they don't read. They prefer, if there's a cartoon version of the book, they will read a cartoon picture. If there's a cinema version of the book, they will prefer cinema. And when I grew up in China, I think all the Green Brothers story, Anderson story, fairy tale story, we received the education from cinema or TV version. Because reading in Chinese is very, very difficult. So most of Chinese at that time is illiterate. So in order to read, is already a high middle class education has to be achieved first, then to read. So I'm not sure about this readership, as if it's always there waiting for your writing. And I don't think they exist. And I think they exist in very different form. And sometimes I always say readers as audience, because they watch visualize the story. So story never dies, but book might die. And the story might only exist in internet visualized form, rather than with words. And are we challenge the concept? Is words novel and readership, or are we challenge the concept of the future reading is visualized reading? So we as writer, how we integrate the future readership, which is very much progressing and in the evolution, So maybe I like to hear others how you think about this.
I think that's a very relevant point, this thing with readership. And filling this up with what Sophie's talking about, I think the thing of this idea of with the hero and the mentor, it's a very Anglo-Saxon look on literature. I read lots of literature, and I definitely write literature where there's not so clear who is the hero or who are all the others and how things happen, and most often it doesn't go too well for anyone who thinks they are the heroes in the novels. But I actually think that the counterwave to this corporate culture comes from somewhere in between the lines in what we write. I think what you talk about, the big time, that sense you give something away that it's not so immediate. You have to feel your way through it, and it's this communication from a deeper place of one to a deeper place in another. And that's to come back to the readership. If stories told through YouTube and the internet at some point can do that, maybe it's kind of okay, because if we also look at what, even in a non-utilitarian way, everything what we do somehow has a function in our lives. So there was a time in history where novels didn't exist. We go back 600, 700, 800 years, the narrative existed, but more in verse. And yes, so one can imagine it being taken over by something else. But if that something else doesn't exist, I think we have a problem, because there's a rooting that comes out of reading novels, developing that resonance that we don't get when we see things, because 50% of our cortex is taken up by sight. And when we therefore see things, it's an immediate emotional reaction we have. We don't have to live ourselves into the shoes of someone else. When we read, because the text could as well be a legal text looking like it, whether it's a printed book or on the screen, it's only through the imagination of the reader that it comes to exist. And it's that process of activating our imagination, we imagine us being in the universe of the novel, that we somehow grow, and thereby grow our resonance as human beings. And I definitely hope that we can counter that by writing good literature.
This is a point. This is a point which you can hardly argue against. And what you're seeing is it is kind of an evolutionary fact that reading books kind of help us develop our individuality and our brain and our vision is empathy. So this is kind of just culturally learned and interwoven the development of our soul. But I would like to take it to the end, because somehow here what is said about, let's put it together in one vision. Could there be a kind of super novel written amongst professional authors, published in the internet, including vision where it's pictures where it's needed, and creating a kind of new form of literature, whatever it looks like. But it could be, people overseeing this. We're growing up young people growing up. You can be a character in this, but you have to write. It's not a computer game, you have to write your part in it. And so heroes come up, it's a super narration. What would be against this? What against this?
I think that's possible, but it sounds like a written version of Second Life.
But young people will love that. I mean, classical writers will feel fearful.
But
I think they will feel threatened, the authorship and the control of the character narration development. But I know some young reader, they will love that. It's like how much they addict to the video game. Video game, you have to do the game all the way along and to achieve the final, the points. So are we being too fearful for that?
I want to come to another aspect of the discussion. When we talk about the future of novel, at the moment we are discussing future of literature in general. But I want to come to the novel. We have poetry, we have short stories, for instance. For me, novel at the moment, and also this is proven by our discussion, is economic product. It's an economic product, better or working better than, for instance, poetry or short stories economically. And at the moment, also the novel is changing into something that works like films. So more and more you find agencies developing stories for the novel, for the film, and I think that will grow in the future. And the other point is, When you welcomed us, you already said we are all people in the literature business. So the point is the economical side of the novel, really as the form of the novel, literary form of the novel. I think it's the most successful form we have at the moment, and that's why it is also constructed as an economic product already. And this is something that, of course, is very much influenced by the readers, by the consumers, by those who buy the product. And that's why our discussion is no more a discussion about artistic future of the novel, but about technology, about marketing and things like that. And it's really interesting to see that, because 10 years before, maybe this discussion would be another one.
Okay, two things. Let's start with the welcoming again. All of us are working in the literature field. Second thing is, I learned in school that a novel is it's prose of around 300 pages. Full stop. There was no other discussion. There was no other definition of the novel. There is no other definition of the novel. And you're right in saying that what we are discussing about now is it's prose, but we can't say of 300 pages anymore, but because the pages may have become virtual in the internet, and it may be without limits anymore. But I would love anybody here who gets a definition of the novel to come up. But first of all, Hallgrímur Helgason is...
Yeah, my name is Hallgrímur Helgason from Iceland. Thinking about the future of the novel, I come from the fields of visual arts, and of course I was thinking about the sort of the formal question: how will the novel develop as in its format? You know, will it change in the future? Or and coming from this artistic background, and where all the things are sort of up for grabs, everything is changing constantly. People are using new techniques. I think the literary business is a very sort of traditional, much more traditional than the visual arts. People are still using basically the same techniques as people were using 1,000 years ago, just writing words on a paper or a computer. And but in the arts, very few people today are doing marble sculpture. You know, so everything is totally. The format is always changing in the arts, but in our case, we are very traditional. And when you're writing a novel, if you really want to go deep, you're just telling a good story. You're making an impact on people, and it doesn't really matter. In the format becomes secondary. And what you were talking about, for those ideas of a new kind of novel, super novel, what do you say, created by a group of people, put on the internet, and it might not be such a new idea either, because we have the Icelandic sagas, for example, that I know from my country. Some people say the first novels of Europe, written in the 12th, 13th century, they were kind of collective product. They were based on oral traditions. They were based on gossip that had been going on for 100, 200 years about people who actually lived. And then there was a rich guy who owned a lot of calves, and he could produce calf skin, and then he hired somebody to write it down, and those sagas don't have there is not an author. So they were kind of a product of collective, you know, everybody contributing to making this kind of a novel. So we have seen that before.
So the future of the novel is going back to the sagas. I love that very much.
Just comment on when you mentioned the novel, the definition of a novel, because I think we so much remain in the Western European originated concept of what is novel. I write in Chinese and English, so 5 of my novels in English and another 5 in Chinese. Because a novel in the Asian world, in Chinese we call 小说, in Japanese we call 小说 as well. 小说 meaning little talk. In a theater, stand-up comedian form. So if you're a 小说 master, you will stand up there, speak without writing down. Writing is secondary form. It can be performed, it can be sang, can be theatralized. So the novel, as 小说, as publication, it only exists in China the last 20 years because we have to learn the Western publication. And when I came from China to England, they said, are you writing like prose? Is it non-fiction or fiction? I said, I don't know. This is really weird. Because in a bookshop, they have to catalogize fiction, non-fiction. And from that moment, I started to realize I'm really actually in catalogize the genre, market. This is the most significant feeling of I'm actually in the market. But in China, I wasn't. So I was writing prose. Some are fictional, some are poem, but they are, sentence with punctuation. This is very Western European originated idea about novel. And I often find frustrated, although I live in complete English world, but it's completely absent. The other continent is absent in those future of literature discussion and as a political landscape of our novel writing. And I found it quite despair sometimes. Okay, in my sober way, I try to speak. Because complete discussion goes apolitical, a-reflective discussion, as if we're as an artisan or craftsman. But I stupidly believe we are also intellectual. We have social responsibility too. And if we abandon that, you are mere a shoemaker or a brand, clothes brand maker. Stick on authorship. This is nothing. I think it's no value.
May we, from this very important point, and I think this you add something which we were lacking yesterday, and I hope that the discussion which is going all around the world will add more and more cultural background from the places which it takes place. It broadens the concept and so on and so on. And may we take this opportunity of to saying let's change the subjects from the question of the future of the novel and take into the discussion the political challenges, as you were talking about challenges, in the sense of there's one question amongst those 5 from Edinburgh: should literature be political? Let's talk about the future of the novel. What political aims, without being, we don't have to go into the discussion, should I be the political, what is the politics of literature? What subjects do we have to face? Do writers have to write about climate change? Do they have to write about Occupy? How can we take in the subject of contemporary world into literature?
I think stories have always been about people trying to find happiness, and that is actually political. And also, I think there's a realization now that you can't find happiness by pursuing this individual goal-oriented path. And I think the search for happiness is political because having huge mega systems is not conducive to human happiness. It never has been. That's not what makes people happy. Individual responsibility makes people a lot happier. So I don't think there's a conflict between writing something that's political and something that's got artistic merit and will still appeal to people on the level that novels always have done. Of course, novels are political. I don't think you can not be political. We live in the time and place that we each individually live in, and we can't not reflect that. And yes, there's a responsibility to reflect that, certainly. Yeah, I agree with what Julie was saying.
Yeah, Jana, if you want to.
Yeah, just to say, I think in Edinburgh what we came to, I was pretty is for literature to work as literature has to be literature before it has any kind of political or societal aim, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't reflect as always a political priority or a priority in life that has a political perspective of the writer. Even a poem about nature will somehow show a way of what is valued and a way of breathing and therefore a way of viewing the world that has political connotations. But to come back also to the African form of storytelling that has survived, and which is why the written literary tradition in Africa is rather new, but it's there. And I want to talk about this form that Halkima talked about when you compare literature to other art forms. I think the reason it on the surface looks as if we are conservative in the novel is that we, contrary to other art forms, don't work through the immediate sensual response. All other art forms do. From music, we have an immediate response to seeing a sculpture, or seeing a painting or video art. So of course, by just changing small things in that form, it seems revolutionary, but that form is that art. Our form, if we are not talking about language or style or something, but the very form of the written word, whether it's on paper or computer, is not our art. Our art takes place in the head of the reader, and their revolutions take place. And over time, there have the huge changes in what novels do and what different writers do. But it's a much deeper level, and therefore much more difficult for the general public or critics to see it. I think it happens over time. Then you see the difference from Dostoevsky and Tolstoy till what happens today. But it's at such, I really think when it really works, that revolution takes place in such a subtle way and such a deep way that we almost can't perceive it and describe it in words.
Yeah. Steinun? Yeah, could you give this?
My name is Steinun Sigurðardóttir. I'm very much interested in this question of literature and politics. I think it's one of the more complex questions and one of the most important. And I very much agree with Janne when she says that even a poem about nature can be political. I think everything we write is it is automatically political. On the other hand, there's the question of being direct and indirect. And one of my very favorite authors is John le Carré. And he is a directly extremely political author who addresses the most complex political issues and extremely important things through the thriller. Well, to my mind, he has taken the thriller to it is literature at its best. So there, the genres they don't matter anymore. And when I say that we automatically are political, I have a very funny, or for me, it's funny. Coming from Iceland, I occasionally write about glaciers. And so in my early literature, the glaciers, they are the symbol of the constancy of the universe, the eternal glaciers. And now in the novel published in 2008, a dying woman is looking at the glacier and, she says, she thinks, you can rely on nothing, even the glaciers are melting. And so one last thing I would like to add is that, what was that last thing I wanted to add? Thomas, you normally read my thoughts, but today you're absolutely failing.
John le Carré, glacier.
Yes, exactly. I will.
Nasty joke.
It will. No more jokes today. I will find out later and tell you.
Yeah. But speaking about glacier and also what you said. What came to my mind is there are. It's a good point to say writing about nature is automatically political, but from time to time, when I read, for example, a novel from an African author, which I do far too rare, or from a saying this, I have to blame myself. There is no African author, there is a Nigerian author, and so on and so on. But I think, as you're mentioning glaciers, you're pointing at local effects of a global problem. No? And now I think we probably all agree that the political developments and the political problems, so to say, taking place on a global level. We all work on them on our local basis. Yeah, this is what Tim Parks was pointing at yesterday. Still, if we have this global problem, how can a singular author working on a local basis face this, or isn't it, and now we come back to the discussion before, or wouldn't it be much proper to have a collective of authors working together on a novel, in several places to follow up one subject?
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, we both do it.
So that's like a separate idea from the one you were mentioning just previously, where it would be sort of crowdsourced. This would be different authors working together. Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
Well, the British Council will finance it because the idea was developed here.
My name's Julian Goff. I'm an Irish writer who lives in Berlin. If several people were writing it together and were putting pictures on it and were putting it out on the internet, it would be The Wire, or it would be if a bunch of writers. The television series. It would be a HBO series. I mean, if you get a lot of writers writing a long, complicated, interlocked story with lots of heroes, it's a television series, and it's not a novel anymore. So I think if we go back to the question, the future of the novel, I think the novel is going to dissolve back into the sea of stories, because the novel was just a way of delivering what was in a particular person's mind into the minds of others. And it's a wonderful and extraordinary, as Jana Teller was saying, a wonderful and extraordinary delivery device for delivering a created universe from your mind to somebody else's. But it won't last forever. The 300-page book is completely a product of technology. It's the product of the printing press. Its length is determined by the fact that there's a fixed overhead. When you print and distribute a book and put it through a distribution channel, it's going to have to cost a certain amount of money. Therefore, it has to be a certain length or people won't pay for it. You'll never have a 70-page novel because people will feel ripped off at that price, that's at the fixed price that covers the overhead. So it's completely a product of what is now an obsolete technology. Of course, the novel will dissolve completely. Once everything's digitized, the novel blurs into all the other ways of delivering bits. So the novel will be gone in 20 years. I don't think people will be able to read novels in 20 years. I give it 30 years, I don't think people will be able to read. I'm not even, because no, seriously, why, as a method of delivering information, black marks on paper are phenomenally difficult, complicated. We have to get every child on Earth to spend years and years mastering this technology. That is not efficient. And if the idea is to deliver a story from one person to another, it may go back to the oral and aural. It may go back to just telling stories and listening. It may go back to touching and seeing and pictures, because they're efficient and we can do it straight away. Hand a child an iPad and they will follow the story with their fingers and their eyes and their ears immediately. Hand a child Ulysses and they're fucked. So, and I think the kids drive the future. The kids are the future of the novel, and I think the novel will dissolve. But people telling stories and people trying to transmit these strange experiences in their heads into other people's heads will continue and will be revolutionized by the new technologies. And so I think the novel will die, but it won't matter. I feel like I'm at the same discussion that maybe a group of writers of the chivalric romance would have had maybe 600 years ago, and they're saying, well, of course the chivalric romance will survive. There will always be a demand for the chivalric romance. All of our greatest literature is the chivalric romance. And in the distance you can hear the printing presses, the very first printing presses going, good-dum, good-dum, good-dum. That's what I feel we're at now. It's going to change more than we can possibly imagine. The novel will die, but it won't matter. It'll be fine. We'll still be here, and we'll still have extraordinary experiences in our heads delivered by other people.
Before Jana Teller is going to say, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It couldn't have been, I wondered if you not mentioned Ulysses as an Irish writer. In Germany it's difficult. You hand over Berlin Alexanderplatz to a 6-year-old and he immediately starts and loves it. And you can, this moment there are hundreds of children, you can see in the World Wide Net now, Germany is a country of literature. There are hundreds of children reading in Berlin Alexanderplatz. This moment they are waving to us. Thank you for ensuring the future of the novel. Jana.
Yeah, I love these provocatory visions, but I also think that they are limited. No, but I do think you have a certain point, but you're only staying on what the novel can do again on the surface, telling a story. On a much deeper level, another communication goes on, and I think that can be done in the oral storytelling to a large extent, but not on the visual. The visual somehow works very differently, and I must see that the novel will develop into a number of different forms at different scales. I think we all thought in the 70s that with the video, the movies theaters would die. And they did for a while, but actually they've come back. People like to go to movie theaters. And again, we go back 400 or 500 years, novels were read by the very little literary elite in small groups and discussed. It was an elite form. Today we have developed, and this again, the kind of novel that's being read by everybody, and the market dictates that masses means that we measure quality and quantity today. So we get down to the E.L. James or the Dan Brown or other thrillers. And they can easily be reproduced as cartoons and say the same. But something that works deeper can't, or something that's more conceptual, we need words for concepts. And the other thing with the novel being 300 pages, even if you also said so, Thomas, I think it's, again, Anglo-Saxon, because we have in the continent many novels at different lengths. Marguerite Duras, who writes 100-page novels or so, and we call them novels if they create an actual universe in a narrative form. Some will then say, oh, it's a novella, but that again becomes something different, and the short story. And I will say even my own best-selling novel started out in its original Danish is 116 pages. And it's called a novel.
Yeah. Everybody has to mention his own work here.
Just one sentence. Just one sentence.
Oh, no, come on.
Just one sentence. The romance of chivalry is not dead. It's only in disguise. Believe me.
It's only sleeping and wants to be kissed.
You can't see it behind certain masks anymore. I'm going to write one. Believe me.
Yeah.
It's possible.
It's sleeping. It's only sleeping behind the dragon.
Of chivalry will survive us all.
I loved what you said about the novel form will die, and I didn't think it's provocative at all, because I think we were swearing that in China. We're hating this novel form, so artificial. We have to mention our own work. Like, I cannot write more than 100 pages because I found it completely superfluous after 100 pages. Otherwise, I will write 1,000 pages. Then it's more naturalistic. And I simply against this attitude of feel so precious about certain form, because that is against the essence of the literature. The essence of literature can be poetry, can be novel, can be prose, can be in theater form, can be in cinema, because essence is the emotion in the story through the character developing, or emotional progression. And that if we don't look at that as essence, we talk about novel as a form, then we are really fall into this commodity. Why has to be novel?
Talking about the emotional and the different levels.
But then it doesn't have to be novel. It doesn't have to be put in the Waterstone or W.H. Smith or train station. You know, it can be put in the stage every night. Put on Shakespeare. Maybe Shakespeare should have never existed on the paper, you know, in a way, but it will exist. It's nothing to do with that form. It's a story, it's the essence of emotion and character. So I have no prejudice about novel as a form. And when people feel so sorrowful, novel will die. I say, novel die, but story forever. We live in the story. We are narrative. We are our own narratives, can be in any form. And that will open up the basic respect of how we survive as a writer to narrate our history or personal history. You know?
Maybe we can agree on that. The good thing is that there is something like the novel. Yeah, it's a model because it's so open in the sense of, yeah, it doesn't have to be 300 pages, can be whatever. There is this idea, and from the novel kind of incorporates the idea of the anti-novel. Yeah, there can be something which is completely unlike the novel. Plus, it incorporates all the other forms of oral narration. It took them all in. It's like a kind of virus. Yeah, it can take all of the things, and the virus can take another form. It can go somewhere else. Yeah, let's switch novel into narration, into larger narration. But we have been through this. When you were talking, the novel is dead, and that mentioning the novel is dead, and it will dissolve somewhere. One aspect Georg mentioned yesterday with the relationship between the reader and the author. This is a kind of social interaction on a very small basis. Reader, author, they don't know each other, but they meet each other in their imagination. They have an imagination of their own. And now all the other forms you are talking about are much more socialized, or much more people being together, talking directly to each other. It's much more of a meeting of real people. So is that what, on a political basis, should we be happy of new forms of a narration, because it leaves behind this kind of negotiation, elite negotiation, to having a say, or coming back to what Hallgrímur Helgason said. And in the Icelandic novels, you have strong female characters, very strong female characters. People say the first feminists can be found in the Iceland. And my theory about this is because these stories were told in the farmhouses. And whenever a storyteller would say something negative about the women, they would say, no, sorry, I don't want to depict like this. And that had an influence on the Icelandic saga. So could that be, in more social forms, could that be change the contents of narration?
Well, I think you can't separate out the future of the novel from the future of the individual. I think that the changes we're going through in our generation, which are by far the rate of change is faster than it's ever been in history. And the changes are affecting the individual, which has to affect the art forms of the individual. And the novel is the supreme art form of the individual. I think Georg is completely right. The traditional relationship between writer and reader in the novel is very much as he described it. But I think that kind of relationship is breaking down not just in the novel, but across the culture. There's a collapsing of hierarchies across. I mean, if you look at one of the most interesting bits of literature I've read recently was the handbook that the Valve company, they're a computer game company, Valve. They have a handbook for employees explaining how Valve works. It's a totally flat hierarchy. Every employee works on whatever project they want for as long as they like. This means that the projects that are most interesting to the biggest number of people get the most resources and get finished. It's totally flat. And that kind of collapsing of hierarchies is happening everywhere. Kings are not quite what they once were. Novelists are also not quite what they once were. And that's okay.
But in other respects, there's more hierarchy than ever before, because social mobility is worse than it's ever been.
No, it's not. Have you lived in the Middle Ages? I think there's far more. I mean, if you look at the actual data, there's far more social mobility now than there ever was in previous human history. If you were born the son of a
since
farrier.
1950, it's much worse now than it was in the 50s. We're going backwards in terms of social mobility.
That's true.
Yeah.
And maybe just to change kings for money, then we have a hierarchy that's pretty strong.
It's really quite serious.
Sorry. If you want to continue, sorry, Steno, you couldn't see it was. But if you want to continue, please. And
how do you see social mobility? Do you think that means everybody flips every 5 years? Because presumably, once you've had a few decades of social mobility, people are starting to find a level that that accurately reflects how creative they are, or how whatever that
I think it's more to do with people's educational chances rather than how creative they are.
Yeah.
It's a comparison with social background and how far you get into the education and what social.
Whether you're able to end up earning more than your parents.
But there's huge cultural breaks on how far you're going to go or where you're going to go. I mean, I know kids in certain parts of Berlin, just as in certain parts of Ireland, where if you wanted to go to university, you'd get your head kicked in on a regular basis. If you were found reading a book on a regular basis, you'd get your head kicked in. So it's not. Social mobility is quite a complicated thing.
Yeah. But
and I think we have the opportunity for the kid who wants to go to university in pretty much across the cultures now. It might be their parents or their neighbours or their friends that are going to prevent them from doing it, not the government and not
the fact that they're going to wind up in a lot of debt.
May I step in here, because social mobility is something which is very important, but Steinun.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm taking the discussion back in reverse gear because I had to protest what Thomas said about that it was not possible to speak badly about women in the sagas. One of our most infamous characters is Hallgerður Langbrók. She refused to give her husband a lock of her hair for his bow, so he was killed by his enemies, and this was to retaliate that he had once struck her in the face. And a very interesting thing is that a lot of the Icelandic sagas may have come from women's gossip. They may have contributed far more to the making of the sagas. They might even theoretically have written them, although I think it was so much a man's world that they didn't do it. And then another point still, and it took my German translator, Coletta Börling, to point that out to me, that the strong female characters of Halldór Laxness, they had done more for feminism than anything else in Iceland. So I simply had to retaliate, excuse me.
The good thing is in Iceland, and this is probably a fantastic example, that each and everyone is kind of involved in literature. And what you said, you know, this is a private theory. Everybody has a private theory about the origins of the sagas. I'm tempted to say that Iceland is a kind of ideal example how a society could have a close relation and even an identity to which is coming out of literature and in its everyday life. Its everyday life is still coined by this medieval sagas, you know, which are ever so interesting because the stories are ever so good. You find so much examples, but everybody will say, hey, Thomas, Hallgrímur, and Steinun, you kind of conspired to take over this discussion to make it whatever for Iceland. But can we, as we all are creative, what would a writer from South America or Africa or somebody who is not here, what would he or she think about our discussion? Wouldn't she say, yeah, you're those people sitting there Sunday morning having coffee, talking about the future, and you're not really seeing what's going on in the world?
I can't imagine what they might think. I wouldn't know.
No, I know it's I know it's a strange question.
I think one thing that's been occurring to me when people have been talking about this, like sole authorship vision of the novel as this means of communicating an idea from the single author to the reader versus this multi-authorship. I'm probably going to get this word wrong in German now, but is there a Gedankenpalast? Like thought?
Gedankenpalast.
Yeah, thought palace. And I think that's a really good way of thinking of the novel. It's a thought palace. And traditionally it's had this one architect who's been the sort of superstar architect, the Mies van der Rohe or whoever. But that's not the only architecture there is. People also need functional village houses and so on. And I do think the space for a thought palace that's got many architects, as long as everyone's working around the same central concept and has the same plan that they're working to, then there's no reason why you have to have this one glorious author in charge, I don't think.
Is it? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah, go on.
This morning before I came here, I watched the China Millville presentation in Edinburgh, which I thought was really, really interesting. A lot of the stuff that he said wasn't really discussed last night about kind of the dissolution of the novel, sort of the way it dissolves. One of the things he mentioned, though, and I think there's a really interesting sort of kind of struggle going on between this idea of big time and this idea of small time. And he seems fascinated by the way that small time is sort of overwhelming big time, and that the novel is fixated on big time. As if, and the old model of authors is that we are high priests of big time, and that what we write helps other people understand why they exist. And I don't write for that reason. I write because I'm totally interested in my characters. I just want to see what happens. But it's interesting that China said something where he sort of, it was I thought it was really a really amazing talk, and I don't mean to say something negative, but there was a moment of hypocrisy in it when he said that the future of the novel will be sampling. I can't, well, perhaps,
I can't think of anybody who would want to sample novels. I mean, this is the thing. We want to sample different kinds of art forms. It's not as if there are a bunch of 17-year-olds sitting in their rooms and wherever just going, I just picked up 3 novels on the Booker long list. I'm going to sample them today. It's not what's happening with literature. And I think that, you know, I'm not at all worried about the way the novel is dissolving. I'm kind of celebrating the fact that I'm one of the last to write under this illusion that it matters. And I've stopped. I've stopped caring. I don't write. You know, people talked about writing for readers. I don't write for readers. I've never once ever. And I know people say, "Oh, you must." No, never once have I ever thought of a reader when writing. I only think these characters live in my head, and I want to see what happens to them the next day. And I'm constantly going back to it. That's the only reason that I can put 2 or 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, whatever, into writing a book, is that I'm fascinated by what's going on with them. I don't care about the market. If I did, I would have to consider myself the worst failure of all time. I'm not out there to make a difference. My books aren't political, because if I believed that novels could still be political, I would be under the illusion that this same precious illusion, this idea that 17-year-olds want to sample what I'm saying. Novels are political, because in some ways everything is political, but they're not relevant. So it doesn't matter if they're political or not.
Yeah. So maybe this is the right moment to return to the crucial point of responsibility. It's so easy to say we are responsible, we are all responsible in any direction, but to whom do we really feel responsible writing? And I think there must be big differences. If I understood you right, you feel responsible to your characters. And
No. I don't feel responsible to them. I'm curious about them.
So you don't feel responsible at all?
It's responsible for your own social consciousness, for your relation to the other. Could be your wife, could be your kids, could be yourself.
If it could be everything, it's nothing.
But
I think responsibility, which could be human, everything, is nothing.
Human is not a self-enclosed entity. It's completely a center of projection and receiving and exposing. So human is a pure social animal. In that sense, I love those writers completely in their word, like Proust. But it's such a mirror of the society, his society.
Is it possible to ask, to whom do you feel responsible writing or reading?
First is yourself.
Is it possible to ask around and get a panorama of answers? That would be very interesting for me.
We can do that, but I think that we have to at least open up the possibility that it's the wrong question, that responsibility is not actually what it's more of an effect of what happens at the writer's process as opposed to an intent. Because I agree with you that there are responsible novels and irresponsible novels, but I don't think that has anything to do with, why?
I just observed it's a crucial word. It appears in significant situations, and it is never discussed. It's always put there as if everybody must understand what responsibility is.
May I say? I think there is no contradiction in this moment. What you say is that a man has the capability of feeling responsible for various things, and this is. But Georg wants to point it down to a special point.
I'm really interested if it really exists, and if very narcissistic characters are talking about responsibility, I always get a little bit dubious. Yeah. When I talk with my colleagues.
Sorry, what kind of characters?
Narcissistic.
Which society you come from, it depends. For example, 1989, Tiananmen slaughter, all the young students being slaughtered. This subject, only writers could write about. Because filming is banned, all is banned. You can write in your diary. But it's so important to let others know. Oh, for example, I don't write in Chinese because I know it won't be published in China, so I write in English. At least you learn how many intellectuals killed at that year, young intellectual. Maybe it could be your cousin, your son.
This is to let you know, to have social awareness. And that writing can be bad writing, but can be Master Margarita, can be Stalin literature, or can be Proust.
So you feel responsible to the dead?
Absolutely, because the dead one is me too, is in me, and I didn't die. But when you can speak that when you have no threatening of death, when you every day has wonderful freedom, as if the New Yorkers live in America, you don't aware. You are not writing in prison. In China, so many writers in prison. And we are here having beautiful breakfast by British Council. Thank you. We have this freedom. You know, you must aware this. Is majority of others hasn't at all have that.
But excuse me, I think what we are talking about now is not the future of novel, but the future and the position of novelists. And this is a difference. No, novel literature is an instrument, and what you are talking about, the responsibility, is always something that has a person and not a, story on paper. So it's the position of novelists. And what I want to point out, excuse me, what I want to point out is that we have the phenomenon also here in Germany. We had a discussion about Günter Grass in the last month. So I think he is a person that everybody.
Sorry,
stop.
I declare a Günter Grass verbot here. I don't know the. Go on.
No, I think people know Günter Grass. The point is that he is a man, he's a novelist, well widely known, and he is...
Go on.
He is
Nothing more about Günter Grass. Go on.
He is this model of a novelist who feels responsible in also what he's writing, what he's saying, as a teacher of the society. We can find this model of novelists, for instance, as far as I know from my own experiences in the Southeast Asian societies at the moment. So there, a novelist is also a kind of guru, a kind of authority for people who are reading. So this is a kind of responsibility. This is not really connected to the novel, but to the person and to the novelist. Here in Germany, we have a change, maybe in the Western world, we have a change of the position of the novelist after '89 or something like that. So if you talk about the responsibility, we must make a difference between novel and written stories and the position of writers, of novelists in the society. It's two things.
Yeah, but can't we, I think, Janne, just one point. What Jolu just said, yeah, about the responsibility and what you kind of, by questioning and answer for responsibility for the dead. Isn't that a kind of original ingredients of literature as it is of culture at all, in the sense of, yeah, for sure, it was literature always dealt with the suffering. It was telling about the suffering. It gave speech to those who couldn't speak up anymore. This is, this is what you were talking about, the development of the soul. It always incorporated this, yeah. And I think it's in literature from its very origin. It's a crucial element of this. We don't have to speak about whether it's been included in the future or not. It will be. Otherwise, it probably won't be literature anymore. Yeah, it tells us about something we don't, and in this sense, you are absolutely right. It tells us about something we luckily do not have to experience. But I'm coming back to the ground everything knows. So Janne, tell us there's something we don't.
Just continue on the responsibility, because I think we're discussing many different things at the same time. Shalu, you're discussing the social responsibility actually of the human being, which I totally agree, we all have responsibility, and depending on the amount of influence you can have, which can be a lot for some writers, for others it's not. Of course, we have a larger social responsibility when we can have more influence. But that's different from the responsibility of the novelist as such, which I understood was more what you were talking about, Georg, that I don't feel that I'm socially responsible as a novelist. I am as a human being to engage in whatever way I can with my society. As a novelist, I take on the stories that I feel I somehow must take on. They come from wherever, and my responsibility there is to write them the very best way I can. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of all. But the other level that is not so often discussed when we discuss this responsibility, right? In our part of the world, for the moment, novels are, to a large extent, revelations of personal lives of the writer or of people around them. Look, I think one of the most talked about novels for the moment is this Karl Ove Knausgård, Mein Kampf, who has written totally about his own and other people's lives around him. And I personally believe we do have responsibility to not reveal secrets or whatever of other people. We can disguise them because we're fiction writers. It's kind of what we do. If people don't want to be revealed, others have other opinions on this thing. But somewhere it's like people in dictatorships in Iran or China or so on, they put their lives at risk to reveal power balances of society, to give the imagination of other options, the most dangerous for any dictator, I think. But have we become so decadent that the only border we think we can transgress is into the private life of the other? And I think that belongs in the question of responsibility of the writer. And then, to add just one last thing on the technology, at least Facebook and Twitter and all that have given the option for those who were formerly just victims of the writers to write back against the writers. So we no longer have the monopoly on the revelations of other people's stories.
I think the author has a responsibility if he sees something wrong in our society, if he is witness to corruption in the political field or something. I mean, his responsibility is to tell people about it, to open up eyes, and I believe in the social role of the author like that. That is a very important responsibility. And also, as a writer, I always think about a reader or an imaginary reader or like a group of readers. And I feel responsible for the book, that the book has to be good, so the reader will continue to read the book, so the book is alive and not dead, because books are dead if they're not read. So that's why I feel responsible for the reader, and I feel responsible to make a good story to let the reader read the book.
Can I say something?
Yes, for sure.
I completely agree with you. If a writer sees injustice, they should write about that. I think a lot of the problem now is what Jalou was saying, that for a lot of writers, certainly in the writing in the Anglo-Saxon world, we don't necessarily see injustices. We aren't necessarily witness to them in our everyday lives. We have quite nice lives. Whereas someone like Charles Dickens would see injustice because it was around him. Now, if a writer were to do that coming from London now, he or she would have to go and spend time in the labour camps in free trade zones to write those equivalent stories that need to be written today. We just don't see it.
Yeah, that's a bad thing about us. We are locked inside our lives.
Yes.
So we need to reach out and to really get to know our own societies. For example, in Iceland, there is like a minority of Polish people, like 5% of the population is Polish. But there has never been a Polish character in an Icelandic novel. And it would be great if there would be a Polish novelist writing in Icelandic about this reality. So that's the power of literature, when it can describe, open up new worlds for us. If there comes a great novel from Vietnam, suddenly we can dive into Vietnamese culture. And so this is the enormous power of the literature today in a global world, that it can tell us stories that we didn't know before and open up our eyes. And also, so that's very political.
I was thinking because it's probably something I've said a couple times, and I keep hearing it, the word should. And in a conversation about the future of the novel, the room fills with the word should, which I think is probably important, because I think everyone's telling us how they work. And that variety is really enriching to hear how other people think it. But if you're for something, I'm probably against it. And I need the freedom to say that. If someone says to me, writers have to be socially responsible, I say, no, writers must be socially irresponsible. I want to have the sort of ultimate freedom when it comes to it. I think that the future of the novel discussion should be a big board with all the shoulds that we can come up with, and then just take them off one by one and say that we must have, we see here, again, I'm saying must. I want variety to be the only sort of principle. You talk about not revealing the lives of others. I mean, my first book was an autobiographical book. I thinly veiled the identities of some people, but hey, that's what I did. You know, do you call me now socially irresponsible for doing that? Or was I after something that was in many ways a response to the fact that in my own mind, my understanding of the novel had become dead. And I needed to work in a different form in terms of essays and write about something different in order to sort of recapture a trust in my own imagination. So that's what I did. And I'm, you know, we have to stop answering to the social collective. You know, we just have to simply be free and do whatever we want to. And you're in different jurisdictions, and you're dealing with different problems, and you react differently. I think you know, I think you're talking about globalization and corporatism, and I think that's you know, if that's what your fixation is, or a kind of something that drives you or inspires you as a writer, then you have to be honest and true to that. If it's something about responsibility to the dead, then you have to be true to that. But we can't share that feeling as writers. And as soon as you tell me what I'm supposed to think, I'm going to disagree with you.
Yeah. I'd like to agree with Greg on that. He didn't introduce himself. That's Greg Baxter there, and I'd like to agree. It has to be. We have to be free, and we don't have to be free. I think we are free. It's essentially the case that you're free when you write a novel, and that's the most important thing. And that we can be as responsible or irresponsible as we like. I'm extremely irresponsible. I have several short stories at the moment that can't be published for legal reasons. What do? You have to be free. I think on a meta level, the novel is a term that is now too big and too layered. And therefore, we can say totally contradictory things about the novel and both be right. So I think if you go to the essence of the novel, it is that it is novel. It is new. When Cervantes invented it, it was extraordinarily new. It was the actual voice of real people doing weird things and interacting with literature and going nuts. And it was fantastic. And there was swearing and violence. And it was cartoonish. And it was mental. It was the experience of reading Don Quixote can't really be recaptured now. You know, it was holy shit. Someone was allowed to do this. This is incredible. And a story about that. Yeah, and Borges, a wonderful story about that. And the novel is novel. So what has to be preserved is not the frame that we kept the novelties of our minds in for so long, which was the printed book. We don't have to worry about that. What has to be, or does not have to be, what is important is that individuals are free to create something novel and extraordinary, and that there is some way to get that out of their bedroom and into other people's heads. And as long as there is a frame for the novel thought to be transmitted, we'll be okay. And how that's done is going to be very interesting to discover, because as Jana Teller's very important point, as Jana Teller said, that old frame, that dusty paper frame with the black marks on it, did such a good job for such a long time. It may not be replaceable, but it may die even though it's a magnificent and wonderful thing, just because it's so difficult to set up a world where there are lots of people able to decipher that wonderful code.
Can I just say something in the term of the novel, because we keep using this Anglo-Saxon idea with
Yeah.
the new, that in most of continental Europe, we use the word roman, which is based on the romance, and it's a whole different background. And even Don Quixote built actually on a long history of the narrative that took different forms. And we can go back to Odysseus, written in verse and so on. And when did it become non-verse? But even some of the Russians still wrote in verse in the 18th century in what we would call novels. It's just the term is not just linked to the new. It's actually linked to love, and isn't novel somehow a communication in love?
Yesterday, there's one sentence I really like. I think in the discussion of future of the novel, we should refer back the past of the novel, the past of literature, because that's is something is on the bottom of the literature, the essence of literature. That I really like last night. But I was thinking the future of novel or literature is also the ambitions of an artist or ambition of a writer. I think I spend so long every day really watching these disasters on the news, BBC World Service, about the killing of the Taliban last night, or killed the American Marine or another banker's situation. I was thinking the future of the world is linked to us in our story. And I do, as a writer, have a big ambition. You know, I know some writer doesn't have ambition. They just want to write nicely and maybe get published one day. But I'm not like that now. I want every single my book published and important. And that is honesty of a young, ambitious writer. And I think lots of writers are like that. Even the older one, they want to be Nobel Prize winner. So that is only the superficial ambition. But ambition of artist is, I think a writer, equally important as bankers nowadays, they destroy the social structure in Europe. And I was thinking this week's literature festival, the Europe Now, focus on Europe, we really should put the bankers on the stage. As you said, there's a Salt Palace. We challenge the bankers, treat them as a type of physical artist. They created the landscape of Europe. And as you, European writer, this is so connected to our interior world as well. You know, we can't see interior was completely immune from external world. So that's what I mentioned, the ambition of a writer. How can we have such an impact on the society as those fucked up bankers did with Europe, but really it's disaster, Europe. And even the old president, actually not as powerful as IMF. IMF is the most important thing. I want to know, how much impact and power we can do for the future as a writer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
It's like they always say, I think a novel couldn't end better with this way. The discussion would end with, that's a wonderful point to stop at. But we wanted to come, so thank you all very much. I think the children out there finished the first chapter so far, and to ensure that that the creativity of writers is worshipped in the right way, or is still, or let's put it the other way, that in the future there still may be writers who can
who are eating so they can write.
if you want to put it that way, we want to return to we want in the end we agreed on coming back to this keynote or to this statement you launched in Edinburgh. Could you give us some short idea of what it's about?
But I just have one. I don't have a printed version of it.
We get it from the back.
But I can start talking about the background of it just to say. Okay. So this came up, as I said in the beginning, in Edinburgh. No, it's not this one. Yeah. It came up in Edinburgh because we had in almost all our session this influence of the market on literature and novel writing today came up in one form or the other, because even, style and content, how can you discuss that without knowing that there's this pressure of the market in creating things that everyone can read, and you can go against it, but the market is a force there now. So anyway, we decided on the initiative of Denise Minner to meet in a closed session and discuss just the market. And after that, we came up with a 4-point statement. And we do know that there is a pressure that some people feel we can't go against of, young people wanting to download music, ebooks, and every creative thing for free. But we were some who think that it can be gone against because the young people don't know that what they're contributing to is not that they take from some big conglomerates something of little value, but that they are redistributing from the little one, which is the creator, to those big conglomerates who, through putting commercials on their sites, and so they gain the income that should otherwise go to the creator. And I think if we manage to get this message out, and so the young people understand that, they're not interested, I think, from so-called stealing from you or me, or so, because they would like to get the works. It's a question of understanding how the whole thing went. Once they are old enough themselves to produce things that they need to make a living from, they'll also understand we need traffic rules. Anyway, so this statement, shall I read it up? And it's just to say, during the Edinburgh World Writers' Conference in August 2012, a number of participating writers met in a closed session to discuss aspects of the publishing industry and the influences on literature and writers of recent market changes, not least as to e-books and the internet. It was agreed to develop a statement of principles that could then be further developed and refined by the upcoming Edinburgh World Writers' Conference events throughout the coming 12 months, and this being one of them. So it's not written in stone what I read now, we can further discuss it. Thus, we, the undersigned writers, suggest the following statement of principle and intent agreed at the Edinburgh World Writers' Conference in August 2012. And one is that all writers have a right to a fair share of the profits generated by their work, taking into account A, the tendency for mega-scale publishing and internet conglomerates to increasingly pressure the income of writers, and B, that copyright, which has historically been the basis for writers' income, is increasingly being infringed, something which threatens both the income generated by the individual literary work and its artistic integrity. In this regard, we take note of and laud the German We Are the Authors initiative and recommend that this statement be translated into English and endorsed by writers and publishers all over the world to form an international movement. I'll just say this statement has been translated into English, and at the link of this, you can read it now. And two, in the context of a rapidly changing global market, we urge national writers' associations to set up a portal with reliable information on national and international market conditions, accessible to all writers for ongoing discussion, with an aim to supporting each other and thus continuously improving writers' working conditions. And this is partly come about, we work in under such different conditions, and yet, because of the global market, we do depend on other markets. So the more we can inform each other, I think, the better. And number three, that writers working in majority languages actively support writers working in minority languages to ensure fair and equal access to the global market. Any information portal, under number 2, for writers should be open also to literary translators who are crucial in sustaining the cultural richness of the book industry. And number 4, that a robust debate on all aspects of the above should be initiated, maintained and developed at subsequent session of the Edinburgh World Writers' Conferences and through other available channels, with a particular focus on the current threats to copyrights. And I think when we adopted this, I should say, it's signed by 27 of us who were in Edinburgh, and others can join on this website. And it's not that we do realize copyrights may come to an end, but we need to discuss it and not just let it happen, to find out what do we want to do something? And personally, the way I see it is that when cars were first invented, there was no need for traffic rules, there were so few of them, but after a few years, you needed traffic rules, and slowly they got developed when people got killed by cars. The internet is the Wild West for the moment. We have no traffic rules, but there will be a need to develop them. We see that with the amount of pedophilia, with the copyright infringement, and maybe they'll take different forms than what we now know, but I don't think this Wild West can or will go on, and if we won't leave it up to the Amazon and Google and so on to set the rules, we, as the individual writers, coming from all different positions, need to discuss what we want to do and somehow create a counterwave. So I hope this can be the basis of a start.
I think, I know I mentioned TPP to you really briefly yesterday. Has everyone heard of that? The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which started up in 2005 as a free trade association of corporations with interests around the Pacific Rim. And they're bringing in some new legislation which includes copyright legislation, but bundles it in with a lot of really, really disturbing legislation that interferes with the democratic functioning of governments of those countries. It's overriding environmental and health and safety legislation. So I think we also really need to specify that this copyright legislation needs to be worked out in the normal democratic way, and that we aren't advocating something like the TPP.
I think this, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I totally respect your right to have these, to do your best to do whatever you want to do about the future of the la-la-la. But I think this is a completely wrong-headed approach. I think it's absolutely extraordinarily wrong-headed approach to the greatest opportunity we've ever had to have every writer have access to every reader potentially. And I think that this is trying to bring in traffic rules at the level of the initial traffic rules when cars existed, which tried to make cars slow down and be like horses. It was The first traffic rules were a man with a red flag had to walk in front of every car to warn people that a car was coming. And I think this is going to be at that level. You cannot try to protect a dead industrial structure, a dead copyright structure. It's completely regressive and counterproductive to attempt to help the industry protect its copyright-driven profitability. It's insane to try and preserve the old system and go along with the publishers in trying to keep it all going the way it did. That is over. We have an extraordinary opportunity to create a new future where, because of the digitization of our stories, there's no marginal cost to creating an extra copy. Anybody who wants to read any story should be able to read it. If we were starting from zero now, and we had the existing technology, and we had writers telling stories, there isn't a hope in hell you'd ever come anywhere close to a copyright-driven, print-based set of rules. So to go in that direction is, I think, insane for writers. What we need is a completely different ecosystem.
Okay, but we have. Wait a second. Wait a second. One thing I learned in university is that novels are driven by conflict. So here we are. Here we have a conflict. Everything you just mentioned, everything you just mentioned, it's the ongoing debate, you know. And I would suggest we're not doing it in this room because it's the internet. The internet is, you know, all the arguments you're saying. That is an ongoing discussion, and this is exactly what was amended.
We need a glorious future, but we can't get the glorious past back. And we need to collaborate on. If we want to collaborate, we need somehow to create a totally new way of having people able to eat and write and tell stories and communicate with people.
But let not the old way be totally undermined before we have established a new way, because in between, you know, as Kane said, in the long run we're all dead, and if we don't eat in the interim, we will be dead. So, but I think everyone is open to, let's also see if we can develop new systems. But
we need a totally new ecosystem, I agree. I totally agree.
We have to, you know.
Meanwhile, keep giving us free breakfasts, because that was an excellent, excellent breakfast. It covered all the major food categories, and I filled up. I won't need to eat for 3 days. So thank you very much for breakfast.
Fantastic. No, I should say we should relieve the people in the world who are sitting at their computers and go back to the fantastic books written by the fantastic authors collected here in this room. I will not dare to say, I hope that we contribute something to this huge temple of thoughts, but maybe we polished the columns a little bit. Thank you very much. Thank you for participating. Thank you for the kindness of hosting here. And all the children out there, they read books and they want us to come down and sign them for them.